Good morning and happy Jackie Robinson Day. It has been 75 years since Jackie Robinson stepped onto Ebbets Field to be able to break baseball's color barrier in the National League and forever changed American sports and probably began to start really beginning to ramp up the civil rights movement in America during that time. I just want to do a brief video on Jackie Robinson on Jackie Robinson Day, probably also to kind of start my series on Hall of Famers. So what more can I say that hasn't been said about Jackie Robinson? I think unlike a lot of his other contemporaries, uh, during that time period, his career is just so well known. He's a guy that transcended the sports in so many ways. The mere fact that we mention his name every year in this sort of way of where we're just honoring his legacy really does kind of like stand out, that there's so few really American athletes who've ever risen to that level where they've really transcended the sport and had such a meaningful impact on American society. And in some ways, it just even being beyond American society, with you're kind of looking at Jackie Robinson. Probably very few baseball players have kind of like been risen to that level, and it's probably through not through their efforts, but maybe just the right time, the right place, and the right person. A lot of factors kind of coming together for sure. Jackie, I think, for any sports baseball fan, probably on your list of one of your favorite players. Maybe less because of his accomplishments on the field, but what it took for him to be able to accomplish anything on the field, I think, was what really kind of helps him kind of just rise to the top when you're talking about his greatness and what it's really meant to the game of baseball. Jackie, so you can see it right before you right here. I only have one of his cards from his vintage era. He has so few of them in regular issue sets, number one. The card I have is probably maybe the one of the least attractive copies of this card, but I think any card that's a Jackie Robinson card is somewhat beautiful to me. It's one I picked up about a year and a half ago now, and it was right before the prices were really starting to spike on him, and it's like I can still get in low on this card, and it's already graded and authenticated. I'm gonna kind of do it, and maybe at some point I'll be able to kind of upgrade it. 1956 Topps, Jackie Robinson. This is one of my favorite cards in general, even though it's not probably my highest graded card by any stretch of the imagination. I've been wanting one for many, many, many years, and I just finally just kind of, pulled the trigger in and purchased it that day, back, I believe, in February of like 2021. At some point, I would love to be able to also get the 53 Topps card of his, and maybe I could probably maybe swing the 54 and 55, but I think any other ones are probably going to be well out of my price range, and that's okay. I think there's still, even though it's a little more scarce than some other Hall of Famers during the 50s, I think there's still plenty to go around for everybody, regardless of what a lot of people's price range may be. Again, what more can you say about Jackie Robinson? Jackie, as people know, is in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, broke the Major League Baseball color barrier, had won an MVP in 1948. 1949. He was an All-Star. He was an MVP and also a multiple All-Star player. He was part of the Brooklyn Dodgers team that won the World Series, and did not travel with them to Los Angeles because he actually was retired as opposed to getting traded to the Giants, who actually were also going to be moving that year out to San Francisco. He decided, I think for a few reasons, he was a Dodger for life, but also he was part of Brooklyn. And I think he didn't want to leave sort of the area of the New York metropolitan area where he was living at that time. So I wrote down some facts that probably people may or may not know about Jackie Robinson. I know some of these things were new to me as I was looking it up. I didn't want to do sort of the ones that everybody knew about Jackie. So I picked some ones that were kind of fun just for the day. So you can kind of take that with you and say, hey, is that something I knew before? If not, you learned something new this morning. So Jackie Robinson was the youngest in his family. One of his older brothers actually was a U.S. Olympian. not just any U.S. Olympian, but he was a sprinter and actually did really well in the 200 meters. He finished second, and this was at the 1936 games, which was in obviously in Germany, in front of Adolf Hitler, of all places. And that game's probably most remembered for Jesse Owens winning, and obviously, Hitler and his some of his fellow Nazi party members were not very thrilled with the man of color, let alone somebody that was not German, winning any awards in Germany that day. But Jesse Owens obviously, broke a lot of barriers that day. But his Jackie Robinson's older brother, Mac, I should say, was second to Jesse Owens in the 200 meters. So he was no slouch of an athlete himself. In fact, he actually had set the long jump record, I believe, at that point, up until about 1940, when it was the American long jump record, I should say. But it was later broken by his brother, who in 1940 broke it as part of collegiate sports at that point. So he broke his brother's collegiate sport long jump record in 1940, right before he entered into the military service. So I thought that was kind of interesting history, just how accomplished his brother was, in addition to him, but also that he was also a heck of a track athlete, meaning Jackie, and excelled at just about every sport he ever touched. Obviously, the one we most know him for is probably the one he was most successful in, but he certainly had a lot of talents across the board. This I knew. I didn't know, actually, that when he actually signed up for ABC Sports in 1965 to join the baseball broadcast team, he was the first black player to do that. First black analyst of any kind, actually. So how cool is that? He actually broke that barrier as well. So I thought that was neat. I had no idea. Many people probably know this too, but if not, Jackie Robinson was not the only one breaking barriers that year in baseball. In the American League, Larry Doby, who's also in the Hall of Fame, broke in with the Cleveland Indians, who are now the Guardians, obviously, about 6 weeks later after Jackie's debut, and was breaking the color barrier in the American League cities. And for the most part, during the 1940s and 50s, a lot of these cities had both American and National League teams, so it was still Jackie kind of hitting it first. But there were still a few outliers that for American League outposts that didn't have a National League team. So he was the one going there and breaking that barrier. So I thought, a lot of people obviously probably know that, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate that too, that, it was really cool that the barrier was being broken down in both leagues at the same time, much to the dismay of the establishment at that point, as many owners who didn't want to kind of, be able to break that barrier because of their own perceived biases and racism, or they were just too scared to do it, even though they may have wanted to do it. This one, Jackie actually had a court-martial hearing in 1944 when he was enrolled in a military service through the United States Army, because he was actually asked to go to the back of a military bus. At that time, he was stationed, I believe, in California, and the military buses didn't have the same expectations or Jim Crow laws that existed in other places throughout the United States, mostly obviously the South. So he I wouldn't even say he resisted. He just was exercising his right not to sit wherever he wanted on the bus, and didn't want to sit in the back, which then resulted in him having involvement with the military police. And he got, as a result of that, he got reassigned to another unit, and some of this, unfortunately, discrimination and racism continued against him, and he was not going to stand up for it, and continue to speak his mind and advocate for himself and others of color. And eventually that led into sort of a court-martial hearing, mostly because of him not following some of the rules and expectations being given to him by his superiors. It was later dropped, and he actually was honorably discharged from the United States military. But I just wonder how much that was like a testing ground for him as he prepared and later became a Major League Baseball player. Just some of those the discrimination and injustices and invalidation that he had experienced just even in his time there, how much of that kind of carried over into the early parts of his major league career. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting, and I found this out for the first time today, that actually he was on an annual baseball tournament team while in high school, an all-star team, and he got to be on the same team with two other Hall of Famers. One of which it was Bob Lemon, who's maybe not a name that's known to everybody, but he was an all-star pitcher and later manager up and through the 1970s. But the other was Ted Williams. So that was pretty cool that he got Ted Williams and Jackie Robinson on the same team at such a young age. So that just kind of blew me away when I heard that one, and that was new to me. So as you know, that number 42, everybody's going to be wearing it later today in games, and actually this is the first year it's all going to be a blue number regardless of what color uniform they are, which I think is going to be really neat. That started in 1997 actually, so this is going to be the 25th year of them honoring him in this way, and honoring him by having his retired number, which is retired across Major League Baseball, on the back of his uniform. And I think most people probably know the last person that was allowed to wear number 42, because he had number 42 on his jersey before it was retired by baseball, and those people who had 42 at the time were allowed to use it. Well, the last person to hang up those spikes and turn in his uniform also is in the Hall of Fame, and that's Mariano Rivera, who was the first person to get a unanimous vote to get into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So I thought those were interesting facts I wanted to kind of pass on. I could have listed a whole bunch of stats and accomplishments, but again, this is a guy that just kind of transcended things, and I just wanted to kind of honor his legacy myself, and just kind of share the knowledge I've been able to get, and the lone Jackie Robinson card I have, and you can kind of see the back here on here. This one's a little bit cleaner than the front, so you can kind of read a lot of the stats and comics on here. Sorry about the piece of tape on there. I can move it a little closer if you wanted to kind of see some of the stuff that's on the back of the card. Before I sign off for the day, so I likely will not have a video this weekend given the Easter holiday, so I wish everybody that's celebrating Easter a happy Easter, and those celebrating Passover, obviously have a wonderful Passover. Looking forward to the NBA playoffs starting up here locally, because we got the Chicago Bulls in it for the first time in many, many years, and hopefully they can have a good series against the Milwaukee Bucks. Looking forward to it, and I wish everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys next week.